Hello, authors. I'm Joanne Morrell, children's and young adult fiction writer and author of short nonfiction for authors. Thanks for joining me for the Hybrid Author podcast, sharing interviews from industry professionals to help you forge a career as a hybrid author, both independently and traditionally publishing your books. You can get the show notes for each episode and sign up for your free author pass over at the Hybrid Author website to discover your writing process, get tips on how to publish productively, and get comfortable promoting your books at www.hybridauthor.com.au. Let's crack on with the episode. Claire Boston fell in love with romance and romantic suspense at 11 when she discovered her mother's stash of Nora Roberts novels. Like Nora, she writes series set around families or groups of friends with a guaranteed happy ending. She loves travelling and learning about new cultures and interesting vocations, which she then weaves into her writing. Her novels have been shortlisted for the Romantic Book of the Year and the Vivian Awards. When Claire's not writing, she can be found creating her own handmade journals, swinging on a sidecar, or in the garden attempting to grow something other than weeds. Wow, that's a fantastic bio, Claire. Welcome to the Hybrid Author podcast.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks for having me.
So from your bio, it sounds like you started at a very young age reading romance and romantic suspense. So back then, was that moment when that kicked off a love of reading, or was that how you got into writing in the first place way back then?
It was actually a summer holidays, and I had run out of books to read. So this was in the days before ebooks, and I lived in a small town. There was no bookshop in there, and I had read every Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High that I had, and I had nothing left to read. And I think my mum was tired of me saying, "I'm bored, what can I do?" So she said, "Here, read these." And so, yeah, that sort of started the love of romance and romantic suspense. And I mean, I'd always been a reader. It's just, it gave me something more to read.
Yeah, fantastic. We share that in common. I remember my mum's Mills and Boons at the side of her bed, and also my love of reading. I think I had every Sweet Valley High book out there. I had the whole collection, and I just absolutely loved them. I did go back because I seen she had written an adult one. Did you ever read that?
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah. I wouldn't. It was quite different going back as an adult reader and reading it. I thought, oh, okay. So obviously, did you find your niche being romance and romantic suspense, and now fantasy through this love of reading? So you write through the love of reading rather than kind of ideas you had for other genres?
I've always been a reader, and I remember back when I was in university sort of thinking I'd like to write a book one day and not really having any ideas of what to write. And then I had a dream one night that sort of sparked the first idea, and that was actually a fantasy story. So I changed a couple of the units I was studying at university to do some creative writing units, and I started writing this fantasy novel, and I think I got about 9 chapters in before sort of life got in the way, and I put it aside, and I didn't come back to it again until 5 years later, and that's when I started to write romance.
Wonderful, yeah. And that fantasy novel that you put away is, you're doing fantasy now. Is this that novel, that idea, or no?
No, it's not. I started writing romance when I decided that I wanted to actually be published. I thought, no, I'm going to be serious about this. And my goal was I want to be a published author. So I had a whole bunch of romance ideas floating around my head, and I started writing those. And then I found my critique group. And sort of for the first 6 months or so, I sent them chapters of this romance that I was writing. And then one of my critique group members said, "Have you got anything else? Or have you written anything else?" And I figured that to mean that my romances weren't very good. So I sent along this fantasy that I'd written, and they loved that. So I finished writing that book. Then I wrote the sequel to it. I think I might have written a third fantasy as well before I decided I'd give romance a go again. And it happened to be that the first romance I wrote after that, so this is probably 4 or 5 years later by the time I'd written those books. And that book was What Goes on Tour, which was my first published novel. So obviously I got better at writing over those years.
Yeah, well, congratulations on achieving your goal of being a published writer. And you came to publish with Momentum. How was your experience with them?
Well, it was great. I really loved the Momentum team. And it was back in 2013. So digital publishing was sort of just starting. All of the traditional publishers were beginning to have digital-only imprints, which meant that they were only publishing ebooks, not print books as well. And I was going to the Romance Writers of Australia conference. It was the first one in Fremantle, actually, back in 2013. And they had a panel which allowed you to send the first 3 pages of your manuscript in. And what the idea of the panel, it was called Survivor Submission Island or something like that. And it had 4 agents and 2 editors on the panel, and it basically was supposed to mimic the submission process. So the idea is that an editor or an agent will only read maybe 3 pages of your submission before they know whether they want more or not. Mm-hmm. So somebody would read out the 3 pages, and if they liked it, they would be fine. But if they didn't like it, they'd hold up the stop sign as to when they would stop if they'd received it on the slush pile. So it was quite daunting, and
sounds it.
There were quite a few stories read, and then mine was read because it was all blind. They didn't know whose story was whose. So the first 3 pages of What Goes on Tour was read, and they got through the whole lot without a stop, which meant I could then submit to all of these agents and editors. And Joel Noom, who was the editor at Momentum, was one of the ones who requested it.
Oh, fantastic.
So I was able to send the whole manuscript to him.
That's great. I've actually seen you in a panel in the past. I think it was at the Perth Writers Festival. I forget what the session was on, but that's when I bought What Goes on Tour, and I loved it. It was a fantastic book. So well done.
Thank you.
So with obviously being picked up by Momentum, can you tell us about what your publishing schedule was like with them? What your process was they took you through each time when you published a book?
The first book was relatively fast, especially for traditional publishing. So the conference was in August, and I submitted my full manuscript to Joel pretty much immediately. It was the end of October before I got the email to say that they wanted to publish it, which was very exciting. And then it was probably a month or so to get the contract sorted. They had the full manuscript, so they were getting that edited. And the book came out in February, so it was basically 4 months between contracted and out. And then there was a bit of a gap because I didn't have another book to submit yet. That was my first romance that I'd written. And but I basically asked them, what do you want next from me? Because I thought, well, I've got a foot in the door. I want to keep being published by them. So I gave them a few different outlines of stories that I had sort of percolating ideas I had. And then I said, or I could do a sequel to What Goes on Tour. And Joel came back and said, we like this story idea, but make it a sequel. So I thought, sure, I can do that. And then I had to frantically think how I was going to tie it in. Oh, and they wanted it set in America as well. So the first book, What Goes on Tour, is a rock star romance where a Texan rock star is on tour in Australia. So then I figured, well, he's from Texas, he lives in Texas. I established that in book 1. So book 2 had to be set in Houston, Texas, which I knew nothing about. But luckily I had a friend who'd just moved over. So I emailed her and I did a lot of research and I figured out how it was all going to fit, and All That Sparkles was the result of that. And it must have been maybe sort of 6 months later that I submitted that to Joel to say, okay, here's book 2. And then it was October, I want to say, and I got made redundant from my job in September. So I'd started book 3, and I said to Joel, because there's never an immediate answer. Even though you've been published with them before, it was 2 or 3 months later, I still hadn't heard whether they wanted book 2. But I emailed him and said, look, I've got book 3 almost finished, and I'm planning on writing book 4, at least the first draft, in the next month or so to, get that out, because I don't have a job anymore. And he came back to me and said, oh, he'll contract books 2 and 3. And then I pushed him on book 4, and then he sent me through a 3-book contract. So that's how the Texan Quartet was born. And in terms of the whole process, I got edits back from them, and it might take anywhere between 2 or 3 months to get those edits back. Then I had a couple of weeks to do the edits, and then they would proofread it and format it, and then they'd send me back a copy for the final proofreading. And in that time, they'd send me covers for approval, and we talked about titles.
Yeah. So when they send you the editing, is it do they go through it with you, or is that something you just look at it, you see their notes, and have you pretty much got to make the changes, or you just accept or reject?
They're sort of notes, and I can accept or reject as I like. If I had any questions, I could give them a call and have a chat to them about it. I have to say the editing was very light with Momentum. So it was more of a copy edit with a few suggestions of changes rather than any deep structural edits. These days I have an editor who I use who is amazing, and she sends me back, a 20-page report on her ideas and things and what's working and what's not. So it's chalk and cheese between actually what I got from my traditional publisher and what I get now.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. Oh gosh. And it's great that, so with the approval of the cover as well, do they send you a couple of different designs?
No, they send me pretty much a finished cover. With what goes on tour, I made a suggestion. The Rockstar's singlet that he's wearing is white, but in the book, Kent is a really dark, grungy kind of persona. So I suggested that they change it to black, which they did, and it looked crap. So we went back to the But the other covers I just loved, so that wasn't really a problem. We had a few discussions about Into the Fire, which is my chef's story. They said, we're just having so much trouble finding a sexy chef, basically, as a stock photo. And I said, well, he rides a motorbike as well, so maybe you can find something with a leather jacket. And they snapped that up, and I had the cover within a week or so. So that's how that ended up that way.
Oh, that's great. And so how long, Momentum are not around anymore, so with your experience with them, how long from when you first published with them to when they kind of closed their doors?
So Into the Fire came out February 2016, and I had another 3-book contract with them for the Flanagan Sisters, and book 1 of that, Break the Rules, was had been edited. It was due to come out in April, I think, April, May. And all I was waiting for was the cover. And I kept emailing Joel saying, when am I going to see the cover? It's not long until it's coming out. I'd like to be able to promote it and share it, and I need a cover. And that's when I got the news that they were sort of folding into Pan Macmillan, and I could ask for my rights back. So I had, at that stage, book 1 was ready to be published. All I needed was a cover. Book 2 had been written and maybe had been submitted to be edited. I'm not sure. And I sort of thought to myself, well, I could submit this to another publisher, but it's ready to go. And if I have to wait 12 months to hear back, and then they have to add it to their production line, and it could be a couple of years before this book comes out. So that's when I decided that I would try self-publishing, because all I needed to do was buy a cover. So it was sort of the least investment I needed to put out a quality product.
That's it. Well, yeah, congratulations. You now independently publish your books under your own imprint name, Bantilly Publishing. And I read, was that, how did you merge the name for that? Was it part your dog's name? And forget the other part.
Yeah, Banjo and Matilda. So we called Matilda Tilly, so it was Bantilly. And the actual logo for it is an outline of Banjo as a puppy. So, again, that was quite easy to come up with.
Yeah, that's great. How have you found running your own indie press? And I can share some tips, for aspiring authors who are looking to set up their own publishing brand.
It's a learning curve, so I won't deny that. But I was lucky because I had friends who'd done it as well. So I could chat to them. I listened to a lot of podcasts. The Creative Pen was one that I listened to a lot. I joined a bunch of Facebook groups. I read a lot of how-to books. And it wasn't too hard. I was lucky that I could, the editor that I had with Momentum, I could use on the other books. So she was happy to edit books 2 and 3 of the Flanagan Sisters.
That's great.
I found the cover designer through a recommendation from a friend. And then really it was just the formatting. And I have quite a good knowledge with Microsoft Word, so the formatting didn't cause me any problems. And I think the first series I just formatted in Word and then uploaded to all the different places in Word. Since then, I've bought Juto, which is a software program that will convert books to ebook, EPUB and Mobi. And I still use Word for my print copies. And it's sort of evolved. So by the time book 4, Place to Belong, came out in the Flanagan Sisters, my editor couldn't fit me in, and that's something I had to learn. Book your editors in early.
Yeah.
As they book out. So I had to go and find another editor, and I went through, I think, 2 different editors for 2 different books, and they weren't very good. And then a friend recommended the editor that I've got now, and I've had her for about 3 years or so. She's done about 8, 9, 10 of my books, and I just love her. And so by now I've got my schedule. So I know that she has the book for a week. She's really, really fast turnaround. So I send it to her on the Monday, and she has it back to me by the following Monday. It usually takes me a couple of weeks to go through all her suggestions, figure out what I want to change, make those changes. And then I send it to my copy editor, and again, she has it for about a week. And when I get those back, it takes me a day or 2 just to check to make sure everything's good. Then I format it, and then I proofread it myself these days. And I do that by listening to it aloud. So I'll format it as a print, then I'll listen to it. And listening to it, I usually do it on about 1.5 speed. takes me a couple of days, I guess. I get bored of listening to it. It's like, because the voice is really robotic and it's just like, but it's a really good method for picking up repetition of words and just clunky writing.
So is that through to listen to that? Is that through Word? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, there's just a dictate function.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sitting thinking that you've recorded it, reading it yourself, and then you're listening it back.
No.
Yeah, probably not got time for that. So you've got two editors then. You've got your sort of structural one, and then you send it off to a different one. So that's interesting.
Yeah, copy editor.
Yeah. How come are you not just sort of stuck with the one, or just they have different traits and skills, I suppose?
Yeah, they do. I really like Anne for my structural edits. She'd probably do the copy edit as well if I asked her to. But having a second pair of eyes on it is also good as well. So Tina, my copy editor, she tends to, she's fixing punctuation and spelling, but she'll also occasionally give me some feedback with, this doesn't make sense to me, or you might want to have a look at this thing. So I get a little bit of feedback as well on the story, and that works.
Yeah. Is this Tina Raphael again?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. She's been a guest on the show. I think she was episode 3, but yeah, she is very wise and knowledgeable, so that's great. Mm-hmm. That's so good. Well, yeah, it sounds like you're in a bit of a role. So you're Vantilli Publishing. The question was, sticking to a publishing schedule like Momentum. So Momentum, I think I seen, was that more like 3 books a year, April, July and October. Vantilli Publishing is a bit more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it really depends on how organised I am. So at the beginning of the year, I usually have an idea. I'll do a business plan and I'll figure out what books I want, and I'll book my editor in at the beginning of the year. This year I've got 5 appointments with her, and I think I've got 1 more left, so I've got her in September. So I sort of leave the last couple of months open because I don't really know where everything's going. As long as I stick to my schedule, I've got time to write another book by the end of the year, but I like to give myself just that little bit of flexibility in case I come up with this amazing idea that I want to write, or in case, something goes wrong and I, can't write for a couple of months. So yeah, I try minimum of 4 books a year. Last year was 5. This year, 4 or 5, depending on if this Christmas book that I'm writing at the moment comes together.
That's great.
If that comes.
That's a really good tip, actually. Do you find that makes you accountable to book your editor in advance? I find if I've got a date with somebody or something, that seems to push me into gear more. So yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And because my editor gets booked up, I need to book her in advance. So I know, I think it was last year, I said to her, I need an appointment in February and whatever other dates. And she was like, my first available is April. So I went, oh
no. And so your books are they all fairly around the same size?
Yeah, my romance and romantic suspense are about 65 to 70. I always write quite short in the first draft. So the first draft's usually maybe 60,000 words. And then I have to go back and add description and emotion and all of the stuff that I skip in the dirty draft. And it usually comes up to between 65 and 70 by the time I've finished adding everything that I need to add.
So if you're booking that in with the editor, she's got a rough idea of, obviously what the book is, how big it's going to be. So it doesn't really differ from that. So yeah. That's great.
My fantasies are a lot longer, so they're about 100,000. The Emperor's Conspiracy was about 100,000. My new one's a little bit shorter than that.
100,000, you probably had to go back and do lots and lots of fleshing out for that. Yeah, I'm the same as you. I'm trying to be a bit more of a plotter these days, but I kind of have an idea, I run with it, and then I run out of steam, have to go back, and I rarely have a lot of information and have to bulk it up as well. So was there a marketing reason for publishing in the specific months that you do put out? You've mentioned a Christmas book there, so I imagine you'd probably want to have that ready, packed, parceled before Christmas, or leading up to it.
Yeah, I'm hoping for about November for that one, and in terms of when they come out, I should be more strategic, I think, but I'm not. My goal this year was that I wanted a couple of months between finishing the book and it coming out, because I found that I was basically finishing it, publishing it, and going on to the next thing, and I just didn't have breath to take. So I decided I would give myself at least a month between the date that I was pretty sure it would be finished and done and it coming out, just so I could spend some time working on the launch plan. I could give myself some leeway in case something went wrong. And it just, it relaxes me. So I was a bit sick of the production line that I had going. So yeah, book 3 in my new series, which is Escape to Retribution Bay. I've just got the structural edits back for that, so that'll take me a couple of weeks to do, and it's coming out in October. So I should have it completely ready to go by the end of August. So yeah, that gives me a month in case something goes wrong. I can order the print copies to make sure that they're all right, and then it'll come out in October.
Great. So you mentioned, you've got a couple of editors, you do the proofread. Are you still outsourcing for your covers?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I am not a graphic designer. I have a couple of designers, and I have a friend who also does some of my covers. So, and they cost me between $200 and $250 US. I do keep an eye on the pre-made covers as well, because there's lots out there, and every now and then, for example, with my new fantasy series, I had a look through those just to see if there was anything suitable or to get ideas, and then I ended up going with a new designer for the fantasy.
Right. Yeah, so the covers are custom designed, obviously, to your specifications, and it probably helps with what the book's about, I suppose, in your mind. But yeah, no, that's great. Do you also research, the platforms you're obviously putting the books up? Do you go through and have a look at what's current? Because it changes so much in indie publishing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So before I sort of write out my spec for my designer, I'll go through the top 100 on Amazon and Kobo and Apple and Nook, and just see what are the commonalities, what looks like it might be coming up, and just figuring out which sort of slant. Because with my romantic suspense, do I want to go more romance or more suspense? And I've actually found it quite difficult to find a designer who do those sort of action covers for romantic suspense. So for my new series, Retribution Bay, they're all cowboys on the covers with sort of reds to give it a sort of suspensey feel to them.
No, I saw the covers. They look amazing. Your website is just fantastic. So you have a book out as well on self-editing for writers. Can you share some of the tips that you touch upon in this book?
Oh, well, I basically go over the 2 types of editing, structural and copy editing, and it's sort of stuff that I learnt along the way, and I kind of put it all together in one location. I was running a couple of workshops for the Rockingham Writers Centre, and I thought it might be useful for people to know all the stuff that I learnt along the way, all in one spot. So the structural stuff goes on the common mistakes that I see beginner writers make. So I've also done a lot of judging for Romance Writers of Australia for their beginner writer or non-published writer competitions. And I saw commonalities between the mistakes that they were making. So, excuse me, things like changing points of view, head hopping, as we call it, too much description, not enough description, backstory dumps, info dumps, the whole show don't tell, which is something that I struggle with even today, but it's always good to be reminded of. And then sort of about pacing and plot and characterization, character names, because sometimes people get hooked up on the idea that all their characters should have the same name because they're in the same family. And as a reader, that just gets confusing.
I think I've been guilty of that, actually. For a children's book I've written, I think the main character's Georgiana, but she's Georgie for short. I think there was maybe the dad was George, maybe there was George the second, but yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, so I think I'll go back and change that now.
Well, it can be okay, but especially if it's a secondary character and you've got them with all sort of similar names, when you come back to them again, 3 chapters on, the reader can be struggling to say, oh, wait, who was that again? Or was that person or this person? There's sort of those kind of suggestions in the book. And then I go over the types of copy editing that you should do for yourself before you send it to an editor. And then some recommendations for proofreading. So, yeah, it's not very long. It's only about, I can't remember if it was 20,000 or 40,000 words in the end. But, yeah, it's just got all the and examples from my work, so you can see all the rubbish writing that I had. I think actually my first fantasy novel is in this book. It's sort of a scene from that to show what I mean when I talk about deep point of view, because it was very surface level. So I use my own writing and poke fun of that in the book.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you do share that, I think, and let people see. No, that's fantastic. It sounds like a great read, so I'll have to get that one. So I am in awe that you can even put out 4 books or 5 books. It's really a huge achievement, so you should be so proud of that. So to reach your publishing goals, being the publisher now, do you have a writing process that you sit down? You sort of told us the publishing process. Is there a process you've found you've stumbled upon or created to do you write a certain amount of words a day or a chapter? Or
very organized, and I think I frustrate or just awe some of my other author friends who aren't quite as organized as I am. But I'll do a business plan every year, and I have a sort of rolling 5-year plan as well. And what I do with that business plan is I'll then break it down. So I'll have a quarterly plan, I'll have a monthly plan, I'll have a weekly plan, and I'll have a daily plan. So I use the bullet journal method. So every month I will write the top 20 things that I need to get done this month. And then at the beginning of the week, I'll write down which of those 20 things I'm doing this week. And then each day I'll say, okay, this is how I'm going to achieve that goal. So that's my process. When it comes to writing a new novel, so with my Retribution Bay series, I plotted out the first 4 books in a very vague idea. Like I knew who my main characters were. I had a vague idea of who the bad guy was and what I wanted to do in each book. So it's sort of a really vague, but sort of idea. And the idea is it's going to be an 8-book series as well. So I sort of knew the next 4 books would be focused around the ocean, whereas the first 4 books are focused around this sheep station. I worked out who the characters were, so it revolves around a family. So I needed to know who each of the siblings were and what the setting was. So I sort of did a bit of plotting around that. around their characters. And then I use the Save the Cat method for plotting, which is sort of, I think it's about 12 beats. And I'll just scribble down ideas for that. And then I'll start writing. And my goal with my first draft is just to get it on the page. I don't really look back at what I've written. I don't edit. It's just get the story down so I know what happens. And as I'm writing, I might be 8 chapters in and I'll write something that completely contradicts something I said in chapter 2. And I know that, but it's like, that's fine. I'll fix that in the edits. And sort of, I guess I'm getting to know my characters a little bit as I go, as I write. So I try to get the first draft done in a month, if I can do that, if I don't have any other things happening. And then I will spend probably about a month doing my own structural edit. So that's when I go back and I sort out the inconsistencies and I add description. And I've been using my editor for so long now that as I'm editing, I'll hear her voice in my head saying, now, don't you think you should show us a little bit more detail here? Or if you just add this, that will work. And I'll be like, I don't want to, but I know she's right. So I'll take that extra time to add the stuff in that I know she was going to ask for if I don't. So, and then, so these days, it's about 2 months to get the book at the stage where I can send it to my editor. Maybe 9 weeks if I add a week on to do my own copy editing, because I use Pro Writing Aid to do a sort of copy edit. And, I hate that process. Like, it is just the worst, because you're going through chapter by chapter, and I have 3 reports that I run, and one of them is repeated words. So you're looking at all the that's in the chapter, or all the justs. I have a problem with just. Everything is just happening. So I have to go through and look at all of those. And I can only do about 2 hours at a time before I'm just like, nope, walk away. I'm sick of this.
Yeah, I haven't actually used Pro Writing Aid, but I've heard of it. Is that something that's fairly new? And would you recommend it? You're finding it useful?
It's been around for a couple of years now. I find it really useful because you can put your own words in. So I had a list before I found Pro Writing Aid. So I had a list of filter words. So those are things that distance the reader. So things like wondered, he felt, she looked, that take you out of that really deep point of view. So I had a list of my own filter words, and I had a list of my own words that I knew I repeated all the time. And so I would go through that list myself, just doing a, find, replace kind of thing. Pro Writing Aid is a lot more detailed than that. So it will look at those things, but it will also look at repeated phrases. And it's really surprising how often you repeat some phrases. So that's good. And it also looks at, it'll do a grammar check, a spell check, and I'm just trying to think of what the other reports that I run are, adverbs, whether you're overusing adverbs. So it's worth it. I think I probably delete about 1,000 words in that process because I'm just tightening up the text. But it's such a mind-numbing process that I hate it.
Oh, the things we do for the love of writing. And do you find, smashing out the first draft, that your ideas, the idea you kind of started with in your head, I suppose you're getting the story out, but do you find you surprise yourself? It's not, as you're writing, it kind of takes you off somewhere completely different than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, it does sometimes. When I look over what I plotted and what I actually ended up with, there are some differences. There's some stuff that stays the same, but I always like it when I get an aha moment. The character will say something and I'll think, ooh, that's good. And so I'll just follow that wherever it goes.
Oh, that's great. And do you have any, so obviously you have a writing process, do you have any rituals that you do before you start the writing process? Like go to the toilet, have a cup of tea, go for a walk, that kind of thing? Or say some affirmations? You know, that I know some people talk about they wear different hats, you know, they put this hat on, and I think some people actually do put a hat on, and then they're in that headspace. Do you do anything like that, or it's really just bum and chair, get going?
Yeah, not really. I have a couple of friends who have those kind of rituals. For me, it's I come into my office, I turn on the laptop, I open the blinds, and then I sit down and write. So I guess that's kind of a ritual. But what I've actually been starting to do lately is I've been teaching myself to dictate the story. So I bought myself a voice recorder. Every morning this week I have been out walking for an hour or so because I really need to get away from my desk and actually get some exercise. And I've been dictating about maybe 1,000 to 1,500 words in that hour's walk. So when I get home, all I need to do is plug the voice recorder in, transcribe it using Dragon Dictation, and then just touch up any errors there. So, and that takes me less than half an hour. So,
and how are you finding that process compared to, you know, because it is quite different, isn't it? Having to think, and you know, rather than being face down typing the words, it is a skill.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. The only problem is if it's windy or if I'm near a noisy road, the voice recorder and Dragon don't like that because there's too much, noise. I've found that with dictating, the writing is more telling than showing. So I'm not getting really deep into my characters. So I'm working on that. But that's okay because that's what, the edit's for.
That's it. And how long do you leave your writing? So once you've done the first draft, do you leave it to sit to rest for a while before you go back to it? How long do you leave it to rest between drafts, or do you?
I should probably leave it longer. What I do is I finish the first draft, I print it out. Depending on how many books I'm working on at a time, I might give it a week's rest, but I'll generally in that week, I'll be reading it and I'll be marking it up. So I just use a color pen. I like to get away from the computer and honestly, I'm so mean to myself because I'll have comments like fix or deepen or this is crap. Work, smooth this, add more emotion. And so I'm not actually making the changes, but I'm telling myself what I need to change, cut this scene. That's always awful. And occasionally I'll find that I've written add this here, XXX, because I haven't known what to write when I'm doing my first draft, and I'll think, still don't know what I want to write there. So I'll have to figure that out. So yeah, I'm sort of thinking about it in big picture terms during that week, and then I'll sit down and actually have the printed manuscript in front of me, and I'll go through making those changes, and then I'll do a second read through of that chapter before I go on to the next chapter. So I'm kind of doing a 2-edit pass at once.
So do you find most days are productive? You've never have you ever had any couple of days you've kind of sat and been blocked and you've had to put it down and just leave it be?
There are times when I know I'm sick of it and I procrastinate, and I know that if I actually just sit down and focus on it and brainstorm, then I'll get through it. But sometimes I just don't want to. So I might go off and do some marketing, or I might work on another book that I'm working on, because I tend to work on 2 or 3 at once. They'll be in different stages. So I'll, one of the books might be off at my editors, so I'll be doing the first draft of the next book. So I have to sort of slot things in around each other. But yeah, I always know if I'm stuck, what I really should do is just step away from the computer, grab my pen and my paper and just brainstorm and say, okay, what's the point of this scene? What do I need to happen to get to the black moment? What, do I need another suspense scene here? Do I need a romance scene? Have I developed the character arcs enough? So I'll ask myself those kind of questions and try and unblock or get past the procrastination.
No, that's great. So again, absolutely in all, you've currently published 21 books, 2 novellas and 2 short stories. How are you finding the writing and publishing process is getting easier, the faster the more books you're putting out?
Yes. So I told myself at the beginning of this year or last year that I needed to let go of the novel sooner. So when I first started, I was doing maybe 6 edit passes before sending it on to the editor. And really, that 5th and 6th pass is just tweaking. So I told myself that no, you've got to, because the other thing is, there are times when I'm editing that I'm like, oh, I'll fix that on the next pass. And then I have to stop myself and go, no, fix it now, and then you can tweak it on the next pass. So I told myself to sort of let go. My editor is really good. She will pick up anything that I miss. So that's why I sort of limit myself to 2 structural edit passes. The first one is the big picture stuff. All of the stuff that I need to fix, I'll try and do it then. And then the second pass is just tweaking, adding a bit more emotion or a bit more description or deepening the points of view. And then I'll say enough. And I'll give it to I'll do my copy edit, and then I'll give it to my editor to go from there. Because I have to trust myself that I know what I'm doing now.
Yep.
So that was a bit of a challenge. The first time I did that, I was like, oh, I've only been working, 2 months. It doesn't seem like long enough. But it's fine. The edits that I get back are similar. She picks up different things now because as she gives me the feedback, I'm learning from that, and so she can focus on other aspects of the writing. And so it's definitely got faster.
That's great. So you publish ebook and print, and I've seen that some of your books are in audio. How have you found audiobook publishing to be?
Expensive.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting process. So the first 2 books I published were through Findaway Voices. And what that platform does is you upload what you want from a narrator, and then they send you examples, narrator interviews and snippets, samples, so that you can choose the kind of narrator that you want. And I found a good narrator for those 2 books. But the next audiobook I did was my fantasy, The Assassin's Gift. And that is it's a made-up world based on China and Mongolia around the time the Great War was built. So it's got a lot of Mongolian and Chinese names in it. And I wanted a narrator who could pronounce those names correctly, and also who could give that sort of feel to the text. So Findaway Voices couldn't find me a narrator that I liked. So a friend of mine told me about some Facebook groups that have audiobook narrators in there. So I posted in a couple of those, and people sent me samples of their work. And then I chose one from there, and she was fabulous.
That's amazing. That really is. So did you just send her the work and then she recorded it and she sent you the files and then you uploaded through Findaway and still use that platform?
Yes. Yeah. But honestly, she was brilliant. So the problem I had was I had all these Mongolian names, and she was like, how do I pronounce them? And I said, I have no idea. So, I'd found them through the internet, Googling Mongolian names, and chose ones that I liked. So I contacted the Mongolian Society of Western Australia through their Facebook page and said, look, this is my situation. I have this audio book. Would you have somebody who would be willing to pronounce these names for me? And there was this lovely lady who came back and said, absolutely, send me the list. And so she recorded herself pronouncing those names, which I then sent on to my narrator. And we had a meeting, my narrator and I, and she said, oh, I've been going through, I've made a note of all the names and all the speaking parts. And so she then actually said, okay, this is how I think this person should sound. So she had a whole list of ways of speaking. So she asked, one of the males who was a Khan, he spoke rougher than, perhaps or in a different style from the emperor. And so that was wonderful. So we settled all of that. And then she went away and she recorded it. And I went through and proofed all the audio files to make sure that she hadn't made any mistakes. And then, took those audio files and uploaded them to Findaway Voices.
Oh, wow. And Findaway, are they American based? Do you know?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. So I was going to ask, you didn't fancy giving it a go yourself, but obviously a lot of Mongolian names and pronunciations, that would have been hard.
I have tried to do one of my short stories, but I don't really like the way my voice sounds. So, and it does take a little bit of effort. You have to edit it all together and make sure it's the right format and, do all of that sort of production side that I'm not very good at. So one day I might go back and try those short stories again. But at this stage, no.
Yeah. Also for your editing book, possibly, I've heard nonfiction's quite, and I think we all hate our voice, but I don't think, you have a lovely voice.
Thank you.
So obviously, I find you quite prolific with your publishing. What do you believe has been the fundamental actions that you've taken throughout your writing and publishing career to reach your publishing success of, 21 plus books?
Really, it's just being organized. So I use a bullet journal method. I have my business plan. I have my quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily goals that I go through. And it's just treating it as a business. So I get to work, or get to my office. It's not really far from the kitchen. And I sit down at 8:30 in the morning and I'll work until 5 o'clock. I'm never distracted. People ask me, oh, well, what, why don't you watch television or read a book or, go out shopping or go for coffee? It honestly never occurs to me to turn on the television or to do anything except work. That's what I'm here for. The books won't get written if I don't sit down and work. So it's my full-time job. I treat it with the respect and seriousness that it deserves.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just how it goes.
Have you found others around you have had the same view, kind of treating what you do with respect? Or I've found in the past, to sort of sit down and writing, as you said, people are inquiring why you haven't switched on the TV. I don't think they quite understand what you're doing, or they maybe just think you are sitting around watching TV. Have you ever found, because people know you're kind of working from home, that they try and take advantage of that? Or could you possibly pick up my kid, or take my dog for a walk while I'm on holiday, or because they wouldn't ask you if you were at an office.
No, that's right. I had to train my family, and I did that very early on. So back in I want to say about 2005 or 2006, when I first started, when I sat down and said, I want to publish a book and I'm going to be serious about this. I took a week off work, and that's when I wrote my first draft of my first book, which was literally 14,000 words and nowhere near long enough for a book length. So I figured I had a lot to learn. But in that week, I made the mistake of telling my family that I was going to be home. So I got these phone calls. Oh, we're going for coffee. Come with us. Da, da, da. And I had to keep saying, no, I am working. And that sort of happened the first year, possibly even into 2 years. My goals were, because I was working full time then, I was working up in Perth. I had to leave home at 7. I didn't get home until 6. There wasn't a lot of time to write. So I had Tuesday evenings when my husband was playing basketball, so he was out of the house. And I had half a day on the weekend that I said, no, this is my writing time. I'm going to write. And so I had to be disciplined for me. That's how I work. So I had to say no to going out on the boat or going for coffee or getting together with friends, because no, that's my writing time. And my family reasonably quickly learned that when I said I'm writing, that meant I wasn't available. And so these days, they know not to call me during the middle of the day for a chat, because no, I'm working.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, that they never called me for a chat when I was in my office job. So you don't get to chat to me. You know, it can wait until 5 o'clock, whatever you have to say. And I mean, some people might hear that and think that I'm inflexible, but really it's just trying to succeed. And I'm lucky my husband works shift work, so I allow myself that flexibility. So say if he has a Wednesday, Thursday off instead of a Saturday and Sunday, I will take Wednesday, Thursday off to, you know, spend time with him, and then I'll work Saturday, Sunday. But I work 5 days a week, and usually, you know, 8:30, 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day. And that's just how I get 5-6 books published a year.
Yeah, that's it. Disciplined. No, that's great. And you've mentioned before, you know, you credit your organizational skills, the bullet point list, your business plans. Are those some of the organizational tips and scheduling tips that you would advise authors to follow, or do you think that someone should find their own way of working if they want to publish productively?
Now, you need to find a process that works for you. So my process is sit down, do it. I have friends who are most productive in the evenings, which to me is just like I'm ready to go to bed by the evening. You know, the most I can focus on is some TV or a book or something. But if night's your best time to write, then do your writing at night. It really is finding out what works for you. I have other friends who are perfectly happy with writing 1,000 words a day, and some of them, it might take them all day to write that 1,000 words, and that's fine. You know, everybody has their own process. Find what works and then stick to it. That's not saying you can't experiment if you hear of a different method. For example, with my dictation, I'm trying that to see if I can become a little bit more productive, or at least work while also exercising, which is a big thing that I need to do, because otherwise my step count is about 1,500 steps, because there's not far between me and the toilet and me and the kitchen. So I need to get out, and I need to move. And I have a sit-stand desk now as well, so I'll wind it up to standing and work that way. But yeah, find what works for you.
That's great. And you're an indie published author. Do you ever submit to traditional publishers? In fact, you've recently won with your short story, haven't you, for the Queensland? competition that was there. So I think I've answered my own question.
Well, the Queensland Adaptable program was actually pitching my book Nothing to Fear to TV and film producers. So that was a really interesting experience. But my fantasy came out, first one came out last year, and I considered submitting it to traditional publishers. I had an agent who was interested, but I think I like the control that independent publishing gives me. I like being able to know that I'm going to write it and it's going to be out this year or early next year. Whereas traditional publishing, you can wait 2 years between submitting a book and having it published. So that didn't really fit what I wanted at the time. I wouldn't say never. This Christmas story that I'm writing at the moment, I do wonder whether maybe I should look at a traditional publisher for that, because it's a little bit different from, it's not romantic suspense. It's got 4 different point of view characters. It's my Love Actually inspired Australian set Christmas story.
Ooh, so that sounds great.
So there's a lot happening and a lot of different families and things. So it's quite different from my normal stuff. But so I'm still sort of writing that, figuring out where I'm going to go with it. So we'll see. I'll say never, especially if they wanted to throw money at me, that would be wonderful. But we'll see how it goes.
Oh, I can't wait for that one to come out. So well, thank you so much, Claire, for your time and your advice. It's exceptional. Where can the listeners find you and your work in store and online?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jo. You can find me on my websites. So I've got claireboston.com and claireleggett.com is my fantasy name. I'm on Facebook at Claire Boston Author, and I'm on Twitter at Claire B Author.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Claire.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's the end for now, authors. I hope you are further forward in your author adventure after listening, and I hope you'll listen next time. Remember to head on over to the Hybrid Author website at www.hybridauthor.com.au to get your free author pass. It's bye for now.